Yesterday, we learned how to solve proportions by cross multiplying. Remember the means extremes thing where m times m equaled e times e. Today we're going to look at some of the tricky problems that exist in this section. So again, yesterday was just a way of showing you the foundation. Today, to wrap up this section, we are going to just look at what problems that you're going to be expected to miss based off of the test makers, because remember, the people who make the tests put questions on there for you to miss, so we need to make sure we look out for these things. This lesson is very brief, but is just as important as every other lesson that we've had. We'll look at some examples of higher level problems, and we'll look at application before moving on to class practice. So this is the only thing that's different in our proportions today. You will notice that yesterday we only had a letter over a number, but now we have something extra, and this is where the parentheses came in. If you did your parentheses yesterday like you were supposed to, it will be okay. If you were taking shortcuts, you're going to miss a lot of these questions. This is where I used yesterday all parentheses, so a minus 2 times 3 should equal 9 times 2. And there really is not a major shift if you were using parentheses yesterday and if you weren't taking shortcuts. If you were taking shortcuts, you have to use parentheses on this question for sure. Otherwise, you're probably going to miss it. Keep in mind that this is a distributive property question where 3 meets a, which becomes 3a, and 3 meets negative 2, which becomes minus 6. 9 times 2 turns into 18. And that really is the only thing that's new today, is that if there's something here, you have to make sure you write it this way so you can distribute it appropriately. After that, we know we get rid of the 6 first by adding 6. We know we get rid of the 3 by dividing by 3, getting the answer of a equals 8. So that is what I meant by it being a brief lesson. There's really not a lot for me to teach you as long as you understand to do what I'm asking you to do, which is put parentheses around the things that are being multiplied. Now here's the thing, and this is as you get better. Do you really need parentheses to know that 9 times 2 is going to be 18? No, in all actuality, in this case, you could probably just put 18 if you want. But when it comes to the variable, especially if there's a number attached, make sure you put that in parentheses. Otherwise, you're going to make some sort of a small mistake. And the mistake that most people make when they're rushing is they put 7c plus 4 because they forget that it's 7 times c and 7 times 4. Now, if you are one of those gifted students that can remember it's 7 times c and 7 times 4 every single time, have at it. But my best advice to you is to use the parentheses, because we are again trying to get questions right, not trying to rush into an F. Here 7 gets multiplied by c plus 4. 3 times 35 you may not know, so you simply type it in. That's 105. And then we have to distribute. This becomes 7c plus 28. Notice how we are using some of the solving that we did before to answer these proportions. Now we go ahead and we subtract 28. Subtract 28. 105 minus 28 is 77. And then we divide by 7, getting the answer of 11. So again, the new work is not from here down. The new work is simply making sure you put whatever that crazy stuff is in parentheses so you don't forget to distribute it. Looking at our third example, again, be careful. I have b plus 4. I'm going to make sure I put that in parentheses. Multiplied by 4 equal to, again here, 7 times 5 I kind of know, so I'm just going to put 35, because there's no need to put 7 times 5 and go through all that, because I know what that is. With the 35 times 3, even if you wanted to go ahead and multiply that in before you wrote it, that would be fine as well. But again, with the numbers, it's not so complex. It's only with the variables you need to be careful. But either way, you get 4 times b, which is 4b, plus 4 times 4, which is 16, equaling 35. You subtract 16, getting 4b equals, I think, 19. And then you divide both sides by 4, getting b equals, and now let's check it, 19 divided by 4 is a decimal. But remember that we can check and convert this decimal into a fraction by hitting math, enter, enter, which stays as 19 over 4, which means that it was already reduced. That would be your answer. But again, math, enter, enter, if you remember yesterday, gives you whatever your fraction would be in a most simplified form. Make sure you start using that anytime you get a decimal in your calculator so you can convert it into a fraction. D, the toughest one you're going to see here, 3 meets b minus 4. There's no shortcut here either because 3b plus 4 meets 2. And so now I distribute, I get 3b minus 12 equals 6b plus 8. Just variables on both sides, so I've got to move it. Remember, I moved the smaller variable. It's best to move the smaller variable, so minus 3b here, minus 3b there. Negative 12 equals 3b plus 8, minus 8, minus 8. Negative 20 equals 3b. 3b minus 12, 6b plus 8, yes, minus 3b, yep. And then we divide by 3, and I think 20 over 3 is what you get. Sorry. Math, enter, enter. And again, 20 over 3 is what it reduces to be, so negative 20 over 3 is our answer there. Alright. So that is the process that we need to know, but for now let's take a look at some problems real quick that apply to the use of proportions and solve them. It says here that an airplane traveled 570 miles in the first 4 hours of a 700-mile trip. It wants us to find t, the total time required for the trip. Anytime you're using a situation and trying to translate it over and see what another situation is going to be, you're talking proportions. But remember that we had what we called a ratio. And the first ratio is that we went 570 miles in 4 hours, which means we can put 570 over 4. Set it equal to another proportion, which is that we know we have a 700-mile trip and we want t. Well, here's what you do. With the number that they give you, look at the unit on it. It's 700 miles. So ask yourself what other number in this first part is in miles, and you see that 570 is in miles, which means that 700 should be right next to 570, and then t is going to be in the last spot. So again, once you do your ratio, 570 miles in the first 4 hours, hit equals. Then you look at the number they give you, and whatever unit it is, you put it next to it. If it was 7 hours, then you would have put it with the hours, which would be at the bottom. But now, what we do is we do 570, times t equals 4 times 700, which is 2800. Then you get 570t equals 2800. In order to get t by itself, we divide by 570. And let's see what we get here. Because we're talking time, again, you don't usually hear people talk time in fractions. They usually talk time in decimals. So in this case, this is the one point where you want to put 4.9. Now on the quiz this week, if you put a fraction for this, which I don't even know if this turns into a nice fraction, 280 over 57, if you put that answer, I won't mark you wrong. But use your common sense here. You have never heard someone say, I'm going to be at your house in 17/5 of an hour. They would say 2.5 hours or so, something like that. So again, decimals usually work for time, but that's about the only time you're really going to do it like that. Nathan and his family drove 160 miles in the first 3 hours of an 8-hour trip. Find m, the number of miles that will be traveled. Again, here is another situation where you want to anticipate based off of what you already know. You have 160 miles in the first 3 hours, which means that that is a ratio. Those two numbers are related. Now you want to go ahead and find m. So what you will do is you will say to yourself, this is the second number they give me, which is 8 hours, or the third number they give me, which is 8 hours. So you ask yourself, what other number is in hours? That's miles. This is hours, which means that 8 should be linked up with 3, which means it belongs on the bottom. And then m is what I am looking for, which means that that's what goes on the top. From there, 160 times 8 is 1280, equal to 3 times m. So 1280 equals 3m, which means we divide by 3, and we get a decimal. And again, think about it for a second. You're talking m for miles. Would anyone ever say I live 756 over 3 miles away from St. Louis? No, they'd probably give you a decimal. So in this case, again, 426.7 is the number of miles that they would have to travel over in this trip. So again, that is two of the situations where you can use decimals, but please don't use decimals in regular problems. These are word problems, which means that usually you're applying them, and typically mixed numbers don't make sense. So other than that, go to MathXL now and take that MathXL assessment. After you get 100%, raise your hand, let me know so I can give you the worksheet and you'll work on that.